Yep, there we go.
Right,
We've
you
got
got
it.
it?
So I'm going to mute mine and you go ahead.
Let me just, I've got there. We just need to adjust this a bit. Right, okay, that's better. Get it out of the way. Okay, then. Well, thanks for allowing me to come back and talk about my family and their contribution during the Second World War. Today, we're going to start. There's three this week, and then tonight, and then, as I say, the next one will be the last three. Today, we're going to talk about Mac. He was my uncle. He was initially he joined the Royal Army Service Corps and then transferred over to Airborne. Pre to his service life, he worked as in a bakery. He got some skills as I'm trying to hide the top bit. Oh, hang on. He got some skill. He was training to be a electrician, a carpenter, and then he went on to become a coach driver. And I think that probably had an impact on his choice of which service. There he is on the right hand side with Liz, who's my auntie, and my cousin Maurice. Clearly during some period of leave. Something that was pointed out to me on the airborne site was that it's quite unusual. He's actually badged up to be an air dispatcher and to be a paratrooper as well, and apparently that was quite unusual. Anyway, on the 12th of March 1940, it says there he volunteered to join the army, join the RASC. That building there is the Croydon RASC barracks. Interestingly enough, before I joined the Navy, I spent a period in the territorials or the Army Reserve, and that's where I joined it. I didn't realise quite that he'd gone through the same gates. Then he went through training, as he would have done. He would have been very comfortable with large vehicles, and of course they've all got crash boxes, so he'd have been very comfortable driving something like that. And on the completion of his, those two vehicles are there are kind of examples of the bigger stuff that he would have been driving, an Austin there and a Bedford, I think, at the top. On completion of training, he joined the 55th West Lancs, and that unit was held back in the UK. Right, it was held in reserve, obviously. So he didn't go out to France in the early days, and he didn't get involved with Dunkirk. And he stayed in there, and he stayed with it. And at some time during his time with the 55th, he'd had some interaction with the airborne element. Now, the airborne element was relatively new. In fact, there wasn't any airborne element at the beginning of the war, and it was only latterly, I think it was after Crete, that, and I might be wrong, I don't know, that Churchill felt there was a need to have our own paratroops. So in 1942, by chance, he was posted or working with 34th Air Transport Brigade. And that's where he decided to transfer, and that's where he made that move. He did his airborne assessments, mostly fitness, of course, training, and medical tests. I'm trying to get rid of this. That's gone. Okay. Where was I? Okay. So it changed its name very early on to the 250th Light Composite Company, and it completely restructured it. Now, in the early stages of the Second World War, and that photo, Salisbury Plain, where they were practicing with the panniers. It was to decide how they were going to operate and what they were going to drop this kit with. Now, bottom right hand side was there's a chap called Major Pack, and he just while they were going through his decision, he was happily at home and he saw this laundry basket and he thought that would be a good idea. And so they devised a secure type of laundry basket as pictured with with a parachute on the top, which they used to throughout the Dakotas as they flew over Arnhem. The panniers are the ones on the left hand side. They're what we'd probably call specialty contents containers, and some of them they would even be able to compact in these small motorbikes, little 50cc bikes that were portable. They'd get them on the ground, open them up, and they would be able to use them. So I know what parachute course he did. I know when he did it. It was on Ringway in November 1942. Now, it was a short course because remember he's done his military training already. This is more about testing his ability and his confidence with jumping out of an aeroplane. And it starts off initially with they go into some sort of warehouse type place where they learn to jump out off a framework, and it's all about learning how to land. Yeah. And after they're comfortable with that and they've passed the relevant test with that, then they start to go into this balloon, and this balloon goes up, and they may well use something very similar now. But if you look at there's two images there. The one in the center That's actually inside the compartment. So the balloon it wasn't just an open basket. It was done like a fuselage, a small fuselage, and there'll be a couple of instructors in there, and there'll be a couple of trainees on each ascent or on each jump, and then they'll be there, push them out, and away they go. It's interesting that I know the American Airborne at the time, and I think they've changed. They changed afterwards. Looked at our chutes. Our chutes were quick release. In fact, you see that little button on the center there. They could smack and turn that, and all the straps would release. And with the American one, of course, you had to unclip the different bits and pieces, which was a little bit more complicated. In fact, one thing I learned during my research is we actually during the Second World War learned quite a lot from each other. And I'm going to try and, if I remember, bring some of those bits and pieces in as we go through. So they do that, and there's on the image on the right is the hole in the ground that they jump out of. Once they've done that, they then went on to comfortable with that, and they passed the tests. The next step would have been out of aircraft, and then as it says at the bottom there, they'll do one night jump, and then of course do full kit descents. That list on the left is the actual nominal roll for his course. At the end, that was the one that, well, there's a photocopy of a copy of it. Obviously, at the end of the course, those that passed, only those that passed were on that list. It wasn't an easy course, as it says on there, and there were a couple of accidents. Lance Corporal Staley, unfortunately, his parachute didn't open, and he just went. That couldn't have been much fun, could it? And then the other chap, a Langmaid, he had some sort of ground accident. I'm not quite sure what it was, but he had an accident on the ground. So not all those that passed, some didn't pass because they were injured, but sadly those two chaps lost their lives. Okay, so they were in UK. They were in reserve. They were called upon to support the invasion in Italy, southern Italy. So they went out by troop ship to Alexandria. Now, initially, their job, what they were tasked to resupply by air for the Eighth Army. That was the idea. That was the. And I've got it. So I need to explain. I'm looking at it from the 250th, the RASC angle. Of course, they weren't the airborne weren't out there to do that. The airborne soldiers, the infantry soldiers, were there to take part in the invasion, which I'll go into. But the original purpose of the RASC was a support version. But as they didn't have any aircraft and they only had ships, they ended up going in anyway. And so on. So in September, they took part in Operation Slapstick, which was the British landing at Taranto. Now they weren't there very long, a few weeks. The idea was to take it, and hold it until relieved. They did advance forward. Apparently, initially there wasn't much resistance, but then once they started to move inland a little bit, again they didn't go too far in. The idea was to hold the territory, and then they will be relieved at some stage later. They come under quite difficult resistance from the German soldiers that have been moved down south. Okay, so as I said, most of the movement was done. Now it's unusual; you won't see that, but they actually, as there were no aircraft, they couldn't parachute into Taranto. They went in by land aircraft. So these photographs that you can see are from that moment as they actually go across into Taranto, into Italy. It always tickled me that all the paras have got helmets on, and the two sailors are at the front are wearing what we used to call their skid lids. So they obviously they think they're probably all bulletproof. Okay, so we move on. So they did that, then they came back to the UK after that operation. They did the operation, they were relieved by the British Army, and then they returned by troop ship back to UK, and they were set up in Lincolnshire. They restructured their unit. Oh, by the way, the photo on the left is Mac. He sent that home from Italy. But if you look at what he's written, I guess that's his way of trying to get past the censors. But anyway, while he was in the UK, he did some more weapon training, some more upskilling training, and he was taught how to use the Piat. Now, whether he actually did use the Piat in Arnhem, I have no idea. But if there'd have been one handy, he would have been able to. And I think a lot, considering it was a very basic and, I don't know, two-bob solution to a big problem, I guess, it was really, really quite effective and in the amount of tanks or armor that it took out, and it kind of surprised me. So yeah, so he trained that. The photograph at the top, by the way, is a photograph from Arnhem, and the reason I've included it is that the chap nearest you is sitting there with a pier, covering that road. This here is the list. It was written on the day or the night or whatever before they went to Market Garden. This is everybody from the 250th Light Composite Company that went into Arnhem, and he's on E platoon on the Max on E platoon on the right hand side. They went in on a Horser. Now, I'm going to go through this a little bit. Okay, so on the 17th, they took off. Their skipper was Bill Gell, and they flew on chalk number 479. You might have seen the films where they got the chalk numbers written on the side of the aircraft, and they were their LZ was Z, all right, and on his particular aircraft there was no jeeps, no vehicles. I thought there was originally, but further research indicated that there was just the RASC personnel and their light weapons and their light personal weapons. Now, when they arrived, there was quite a big change round, and it caused some confusion because they didn't tell anyone. Um, there was another platoon, I think it was first platoon, was supposed to go with the first airborne into Arnhem towards the bridge. Now, there was a problem when they landed at the LZ. Max troop, Max platoon, all landed on a Horser by Horser. So they were all together. Unfortunately, the first platoon that should have gone into the bridge, that was partly by horse. So the jeeps and the trailers went in by Horser, but a lot of the lads were parachuted in, and so they were dispersed. So Gell, who was the skipper of Max Horser, the lieutenant, just simply said, "Look, me and you." He's talking to a bloke called Kramer Bing, and he said to him, "Look, it's common sense. Let's swap places," and they did. And so basically, number three followed the first brigade to Arnhem, and that's how it happened. Again, there's only two or three jeeps per, and I can't remember exactly. I think two jeeps it is per each, and some ammunition. They drove into Arnhem, but of course, Mac, he might have catched a lift, but if not, he'd have had to march in down the line route, which I'll show you in a second. I'll just put this up to give you an idea what it must have been like. Now, I know the RASC were left after the first platoon. The infantry went into Arnhem virtually as soon as they assembled. They didn't need to wait for anyone. Time is in the essence, so to speak. But because there's a little bit of confusion that it takes, so it gives you kind of breakdown. So I guess 20 minutes, 40 minutes. That's how much behind they were. The jeeps, of course, would have caught up, but the men would have had to march that distance. Fortunately, at that particular time, resistance wasn't as strong as it then became. But as I say, as soon as it hits the ground, stand by, they set off some charges, punch open the front of the nozzle, front of the aircraft. That's mostly if you've got a jeep in there. If you've not got a jeep in there, then you'd have gone out the side door. The jeeps would have been driven out because obviously there'd have been two other aircraft with jeeps in that were theirs, plus the jeeps from the other unit that weren't going down. And then, of course, by that time, 5 to 10 minutes, there was some sporadic fire taking place, and then they got everything out sorted, and then ready to go into Arnhem. Yeah, and as a comment was made by somewhere, there was wounded soldiers and crash gliders were everywhere. Okay, and the German reaction started to increase by the minute. So once you hit the LZ from that point, then off he wanted to go, and that became a much bigger problem in the days to follow. Of course, when they were continually, when the Germans had secured their positions, and there was resistance was quite significant. Now, this is quite interesting because the field patterns haven't changed. The plan originally was there was three routes into Arnhem. This is line route. I can't remember the names of the other two, but there's the green route and the red route. Line route is the only route that made it. I'm going to show you a picture. I'll show you a picture now. Actually, I'll go back and come back to that. That's the landing area where Mac landed. That's LZZ. All right, that's the landing area. Obviously, some overshot. It went into the trees, but most, fortunately, landed on the field. Now it's quite a distinct shape, that field, and it's still. This is an old drawing, but it's still relevant because that field, if you look at an image, and I did on Google, that field is still there, still that shape, and it's that point there. So they assembled. We know they landed. They assembled. They decided they were going to go with the first parachute brigade into Arnhem. So they took Line Route, and this is Line Route here, the blue route. And of course, Mac marched it. I actually marched it. Marched it. I didn't march anywhere actually. I walked it when I was over there doing the our airborne march a couple of years ago. And the idea was to get to this point, and they would split, cross the railway bridge, and take it. Take the that group would take the Arnhem Bridge from the south. They would go on and take it from the north. And I mentioned earlier that we learned things from each other. This is apparently I discovered an American tactic that we adopted and continue to adopt to this day, where all bridges are taken from both ends. These two routes they were held up all over the place. There was a lot of fighting in Oosterbeek, and this group here. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think my recollection is from the works that I've read that they ended up trying to make their way back to Oosterbeek and around here. One of the biggest issues that they had was they didn't send enough people in to start with, but also there was too many landing zones to manage, I think, to protect, and I think that left them a bit thin. As I said, anyway, there's the landing area there. This is Arnhem itself. Now, obviously, it was hand to hand. Well, say hand. It was very close quarter fighting. You know, you'd open a door and there'd be a German or there'd be one of your own, and I'm sure there was some blue on blue as they call it now. But this is Arnhem by the bridge. This photo was taken afterwards, and basically there was a pocket here. Not that, so I've gone out too far. This bit here was held by the Brits. Okay, and there was a few here and some further down by the bridge. The ones on this side of the bridge, although this lot, this group here surrendered or they lost their footing around about the 21st. There were people on this side, lads on this side that were fighting 2 or 3 days after. I just didn't realise it that that it had been lost. The bridge had been lost. The reason I've got the arrow there is that the 250th Light Composite, and they were broken into different groups where they fought, was actually housed here. They were given that house, and in the reports it says it's opposite a prison, and I really struggled to find it, but it wasn't a prison actually. This was the courtrooms, and here was a holding area, so it wasn't really a prison, but that's how it's in the reports. And they came under a severe attack, almost continual. There was someone over here with a Spandau, people, and eventually it became overwhelming. In fact, what happened was they held on in that house until I think it was a flamethrower or incendiaries just set it on light. The place was falling apart and ablaze. So you can't really see that. But then they moved into that one. And then what happened was when they ran out of ammunition, Lieutenant Gell, or was it Captain Gell? Lieutenant Gell. He made a decision. He said, look, there's no point staying here. We're not going to surrender. So I'm going to split you up into 3 groups and you make a break for it. You try and get out if you can. And there was, I think it was about 20 people, and they split into 3 groups. And on that day, they were all some lost their lives. Yeah. But on that day, those that didn't lose their life or weren't wounded were captured. And Mac was one of those. It's funny, there's so many stories, and I'll talk. I've made a note of a few, and at the end, if you want, I'll go through them. But things that people have told me, instances and stories. One group in Oosterbeek ran out of ammunition. They basically were in this. They were almost surrounded, and there was a little road, and at the end there were some trees where they knew there was ammunition. There was an ammunition stash. So the sergeant in charge just said, look, lads, there's fixed bayonets, and we'll just charge. All right. And so they did. They virtually ran out of ammo. They fixed bayonets. They jumped out of this building. There was apparently 35 of them. And they run down this hill. The Germans, who were almost encircled them, thought, I don't know what they thought, but apparently they just got their head down. They thought, I guess, that they were going to go for them. So it wasn't until they got to the bottom of the road that the Germans realised that what was going on, and they returned fire. And by that time, they'd actually made it, and they'd all made it to the bottom. It was quite interesting. And there's a lot of stories that as I say at the end, that blows me away, that just seem to get missed. So 21st, held the position. They fought under heavy. They were ordered to disperse in parties of 10. Well, let's say a maximum of 10. Taken prisoner on the breakout, and he was sent to Starlog 12A. That's some of the airborne lads in 12A. And after that, there was a 5-day march to 4B. I just want to show you that picture on the right is Hellfire Corner under the arch. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff in the books or the chapters that I've written. There's quite a lot more, but I try to shrink it down to make what's relevant. I have a few pictures, but under that arch was a Spandau, and that was known as Hellfire Corner by the lads. And as you can see by the holes, there's been a lot of fire, and that I took that a couple of years ago. That photograph. And there's a photograph of 4B. I was going to say in happier times, probably happier times for the Germans, I guess. That was in its early days. I guess it weren't quite so happy when we were knocking on their doors, so to speak. So that's where Mac would have been accommodated initially. And then another forced march to 4 Delta. And that was really a dispersal. I mean, the war was very much coming to an end there, and it was a dispersal point really. They were just forced labour. I don't quite know what Mac did, but I guess he was on a farm. One thing that was noted, how much how kinder the SS were, and then there was no sort of well, there was a couple of executions, I believe, but basically they were very kind towards the Brits that were taken prisoner. But I guess that might have been something to do with the fact that the rest of the army was knocking on their door, and the last thing they wanted to do was get caught doing something they shouldn't. So anyway, so he was there, liberated by the US 69th in April. He stayed. When he come back, he filled out. As I say, he felt that his treatment was as good as can be expected, and I guess these things have an impact on people. And he ended his active service in December 1945 with an absolutely exemplary record. It was interesting, actually, because when I wrote to the Ministry of Defence, they were quite happy to give me his docs, and they redacted very little. And yet some of it's funny, other docs I tried to get hold of, and it's been a real difficulty. That, by the way, that's Maurice, his son. Okay, and that's Mac there, and that's Edith, my aunt, Uncle Art. That one there is my aunt that's living in Canada, bless her. My cousin, I should say. Okay, that's Mac. I'd say at the end when we finished, there's a couple of things I'm keen to talk about Arnhem, that little stories that when I spoke to some people when I was out there and stuff like that. Now we're going to talk about Tom and Lance Bombardier. No, sorry, then George. Before we talk too much about Tom, I just want to mention something that's quite amusing. My grandfather was a bit of a lad, and he was in the pub apparently, and he'd had a bit too much to drink. And he bet this bloke £5 that one of his children was going to be knighted, was going to be a sir. And so he won his £5 because when Thomas was born, on his birth certificate is actually listed as Sir Thomas Archibald Weight. So he won his fiver, which is probably a lot of money in those days. Okay, so these two, they both joined the army at the same time, 1939, TA again, Croydon. This is the TA barrack, Mitcham Road Barracks, still there now. That building wasn't there. That's the Airborne Reserve. But it's a yeomanry unit now, and he joined the Queen's Regiment, and it was in a searchlight battalion, and that's a searchlight that they would have operated. November 29. So they were both volunteers again. They joined before the war, so the good advantage of that, of course, is you can kind of pick what you want to join, and that's what they did. They joined, deployed, and went to Bristol. There's a photograph of of some of the Blitz in Bristol. Bristol's a big dock, so it's an important facility, and therefore, although without any fighter cover, they certainly got some bombers through. The right-hand side is his mobilisation paper. I put one on there. I believe his brother's exactly the same, and except when it says weight, it's got a question mark inked on. I'm assuming that the admin clerk thought, hang on, is this a duplication? And then he realised they were two different people. February 40, they moved to Plymouth. Again, same anti-aircraft work. That's Plymouth Dockyard during an air raid. That bridge is still there now, that shaky bridge. And when I was in the Navy, I used to walk across there to get to the dockyard. That bit of an inlet is now a car park. And then in spring 41, they went to Hatfield, and this is the old Mosquito, the RAF Mosquito factory, and their job was to protect that. I do believe they were successful, and there weren't any hits. This is where the magic happened. This is when it changes big time. In 41, they transferred to the Maritime Anti-Aircraft Battery. Now, just to briefly explain what that's all about. As you are fully aware, convoys, the convoy work, and our country wouldn't have survived if we hadn't have had the convoys and the ships hadn't have got through. And initially, of course, they weren't defended, or they were defended by some sailors. But then what they realised was that weren't adequate enough, so they actively recruited for seamen to become gunners on defensively, and they also transferred soldiers as well. So he would have gone. He would have been retrained. Is one that's out of the manual. That little picture of the Vickers, I think it's there, the Lewis gun, I should say. And then you've got and they trained 12 weeks, as it says there. So they'd have done some basic naval training because those of us who've been to sea will understand that it is a kind of different. I always call it a lifestyle warp. It is completely different to anything else, and it's a different language and different way of living. Then they'd have done gunnery training because they clearly wouldn't have worked on some of the weapons that were needed on the merchant ships, and then eventually they'd have done some seamanship. I'm not so sure how much seamanship they would have done because that wouldn't have really been, as we say, their part of ship. So that ship down below there is the MV Ensis, Ensis, and basically they were doing convoy work. A lot of it, I guess, would seem routine and mundane. This one here originated in Bermuda with Halifax as a destination, and if you look at it obviously did that run quite often because if you look there, BHX, Bermuda, Halifax, and those are the convoy numbers. Okay. Sometimes they would do the run to jib, which is what we'll come onto later. Photograph on the right is Tom and George during their TA training, or certainly before the war. And at the top, I've got a lot of bits of paper, I've got quite a few artifacts. That's one of George's leave passes off the ship. I've included this photograph because I wanted you to see the amount of ships that were attacked and wrecked just off the mouth of the Thames. And it's also important to point out, and I may have mentioned this last time, that a positive decision was made to use convoys to go through the channel rather than around. It was safer to go around the coast, but it took much longer. So they could have gone past Ireland, up past Scotland, and back down again, maybe to the northern to Tyne or Newcastle and all around there. But they came to a decision that they were going to do the channel run, the channel dash. So they were so that basically this is what the convoys would run through. Fortunately, I guess that a lot of the ships did get sunk, but a lot of the convoys were attacked initially by batteries from the shore side, and then latterly by bombers. And I will show you a little film in a minute. Unfortunately, that convoy got through the gap unscathed. And you could look at some statistics on the left-hand side there of the UK losses. I'm sure the US losses mainly. It's just that's where the research is. And PQ-17, as I've mentioned on there, where it was I think was a complete disaster. And there's much written and said about that. There's a little video. You can just have a quick look at this, and you might find it kind of like opens, gives you a bit of insight into what it must have been like and what George and Tom must have endured, because a lot of their convoys latterly, anyway, was in the Channel. That's it. I'm going to stop it there because I think the sound's gone, but I think you get the general picture. I've tested it earlier and the sound was fine. I'm not quite sure why it's not running out at the moment. Um, the photographs you see now are ships that they served on Cambrian coast, the Fana, the Slolair, and then we've got a couple more here. These are all ships that they served on together on various convoy work, and is recorded in their ship's book. They have, even though they're army, they still were kept a seaman's book. Then you've got a tanker at the bottom there called the standalone, which what I would have thought was one of the more dangerous operations they could be on. Okay, they joined the SS City of Singapore. That's it. And this is where they had a few issues on this. Okay. Their first convoy was quite clean. They had no problem at all. As I said, 47 ships and none were lost. However, it didn't always end like that. Okay, she was destined for the for Freetown and then Cape Town. Byra arrived in Freetown the 1st of April 42. I've got a photograph later which will show you what it was like at HMS Ellen. So they had 27 long and short convoys, and so they were very fortunate. But at 5 o'clock in the 1st of May 43, their convoy came under attack by U-515, and it attacked 3 ships. And the first one it hit was as the City of Singapore, their ship. After a minute, it took it down. It were these are old ships, okay, and it started to go down after less than a minute. It was under a blaze. The photographs on the right, by the way, that's top one there is while they were on the City of Singapore, and the bottom one is George. And I told his daughter it's a poser shot. There's no way he's firing at anything dressed like that. And no one his brother Tom wouldn't have been there taking a photo of him. So, yeah, so there he was. That was after a minute. It started to go down. It started to have serious problems. Now, they jumped in the water. The survivors picked up. There was 2 ships there: Birdlip, which is top left-hand side, and Arran, which was the right one at the bottom right. The little map there with the marker is where the ship, the City of Singapore, sits at this moment. There are some photographs on the net somewhere from divers have been down on it. So both the lads were at their action stations at the time, as you'd expect, and the fire took place very quickly. They both ran to the ship side and they both jumped together. But what was quite amusing is, and a little bit, Tom as a person is a very gentle, very caring, very thoughtful person, and very much wanted to make sure things was right. Whereas George is very much a sort of Jack the lad, easygoing. Yeah, it'll be all, everything's going to be fine type attitude. Until when they started to run for the ship side, Tom looked around and George hadn't got his life jacket, so he made him go back and get it for the jump. So they both jumped together with life jackets on. A little story there. They landed in the water, they were together, but that little story there, which I will read out to you, but it was quite a lovely thing, and I wanted to make sure that I don't normally put it in slides, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss it off. And there were two lads who were best mates, and they used to sing together. And it says on there, "You're my sunshine." When the ship sunk, they're in the water, and you can't see. I don't know if any you've been at sea and you've been in the water. You literally can't see past the next wave. That's why your life jackets have got whistles and lights and stuff. And so his mate was so concerned that he sung out, "You are my sunshine." Started to sing the song from the water. And faintly in the distance, he heard his mate sing it back. So he was more than happy. Anyway, when they were rescued, and they went to HMS Ellen, which was in Freetown. And the important thing there is they never sailed together again. Freetown, bottom right hand side, that photograph's the only one I could find, and it really was just a shanty, a few huts and a dock, probably a bit of fueling asset, but it wasn't very big. Top photograph there is Tom and George in Freetown, just before they made their way back to UK. That's the last. So that's them working together. Then the next time you see them, they are. It's a different story. So there's George again there. Let's just talk about him on his own now. After the torpedoing, he joined the MV Governor and did a bit of local work there, local convoy work, and then he was immediately after that transferred to OLEV, ready for D-Day. Okay, his job was their job was stores. They were shipping stores in and equipment. So that was virtually continuous, and I'll show you. Well, say virtually continuous. They were very busy, and I'll show you a list there. Now, because it was stores, and I'm kind of figuring that's why he got some leave passes to Caen and to Ouistreham, and I think that's probably because he was escorting the stores towards the front line at the time. At the bottom is the MV Governor, which was the ship that ship he was on previously. There's the OLAV there, and just a note, that's the list of most of the convoys that he was on during that period. So, Southend to Seine Bay, that's Normandy basically, and backwards and forwards, and he'd done that run regularly. It must have been quite stressful, quite demanding, because you're at that time, especially in the early period there, D-Day and so on. You're under continuous air attack. No one's going to they're not going to let you go. And not only was there air attack, there was attack by torpedo boats and all sorts. That's the ship's log, and it gives you a rough idea of where it went if you look up and down the dates. But just before you get to D-Day, and I can't quite read the early bit, special operations. Okay, there's nothing about that period of time in the log, and then it starts off again down here, November. So that June to October, special in red. I'm not quite sure. I think that's when she got there was a collision and got damaged. George's time, then it became pretty right. He actually was poorly. It's very difficult when you try and get MOD documents, and of course, he's passed now. I couldn't ask him. I tend to think that because of what I've read, that I think he probably had a stomach ulcer, and the Navy doesn't like people going to sea with ulcers. In fact, it's the quickest way to get a shore draft, and he went into hospital, and I'm assuming he had an operation. He was away for a month. And then he was posted to London for a short while, and then on to Shoeburyness, and I'd worked there as well, funnily enough, later on in my naval career. And that's the garrison at Shoeburyness, as it is now. These are leave passes on the right-hand side and bits and pieces, little bits of ephemera that are relevant to his career. And now we come to almost to the end. I think he never really recovered at the end of that. He was always poorly, and he bounced in and out of it. I mean, the war was nearly over by then anyway, so he didn't miss out on very much. And then he was posted to military to be mobbed, and that was in London. I think Ibex House he was posted to. It's still there now, and from there he got demobbed. On the end of his service, he joined the RAF. So clearly his issue was under control, or he'd had an operation, it resolved, and he stayed in there until he retired. There is actual medals at the bottom there, although I'm pretty sure there's one missing. I'm not, couldn't swear on it, but that's the one he's got. Tom has got different medals as well, and it's odd that they should have different medals. This one here, and it's a Territorial Army Long Service Medal, so I know that he stayed as a reserve after. Okay, now we're just going to switch over to Tom. As I say, Tom's time. Again, after D-Day, things started to, get a little bit quieter. In 1943, he was on the Learville, French built, and he did, again, convoy work. I think I'm not going to say that convoy work was particularly dull and not interesting, because I'm sure it wasn't. But from me telling you about it, it's just going to be repetition. I'm sure it was far from boring when you're actually on the ships. The one here I'm interested in, I find fascinating, is the ship on the right-hand side is the SS Granby, which is Canadian flagged. It's actually, you can still see it now. She got beached. She hit a storm in where was it? What was the place? Oh, Bird Cove in Manitoba. They beached her there, and apparently she's still there now, although you wouldn't recognise her. She's like a hull. And after that, he went on back to Shoeburyness and did some training on the Auckland guns. There's Auckland's there, and that's the same sort of thing he would have been trained on. That's a more modern version of it. But the photograph down below is the Empire Spearhead in Southampton, and he was at D-Day as well. So we've already got 3 people at the family. My father, these 2. I don't know. Yeah, I think so far we've got 3 that were there at D-Day, and there's more to come. So they were it must seem really odd that they were all, I mean, even the landing at Taranto, while he was landing, my other Uncle Charlie was landing at Salerno, so it's kind of funny they're all so close together. Here's some photographs. On the right-hand side is is basically Southampton, as it was prior to D-Day. Southampton was the main port for the Canadian and British troops, not the only one, but the main one. I think American troops went out of Weymouth and probably Plymouth as well. I'm not sure 100%, but I'm pretty sure. And I think they sort of lined them up in accordance with the beaches that they were going on to when they got into France. And the photograph at the bottom was it's from a warship. It's not from a merchant ship, but it shows an escort with the very same landing or some of the landing craft that you see coming out from Southampton. Again, October 44. It's all coming to a grind to a halt now. He joined the Fort Brew and then onto the Baron Ruthven. He had a convoy out in he had several convoys going out to the Mediterranean or to Gibraltar anyway. The submarines don't like the Mediterranean. It's too shallow, and that makes them very easy to attack. There wouldn't have been any threat from air attacks by that time, but I would imagine that these ships that were lost, and I didn't check it, but I would imagine they'd have been lost in the Bay of Biscay, running into it. Um, okay. Oh yes, Tom ended up in hospital in the end. He actually fell down a hatch, so nothing. It happens. I fell down. That it's painful. I've done it myself. All right, and but he obviously came out a lot worse off than I did, and he was went to hospital. The image at the bottom there, the color image, is a museum in Gibraltar where they set it up as it was during the war. If anyone's been to Gibraltar, you'll see the rock itself is riddled with caves. All sorts. There's one cave that goes right through the centre from Catlan Bay to the dockyard. There's a maze of tunnels. Most of them, or some of them, which are open, look across Spain, and they date back to the 1700s. Okay, so he came back to Liverpool, and he ended up in Germany. And I've got to say this, as I said to you earlier, Tom was a really, from my memory, he was a lovely. They're all, all your uncles are lovely, but he was a really sensitive bloke, and I actually think what he saw in Germany during the Second World War had a impact on his life far greater than the rest of his service. He witnessed many. I'm not going to go into it. There's enough written about what went on. But I'm pleased to say that none of it was our lads, and I mean I don't think there were American soldiers either involved with that, and it certainly wasn't mentioned. But some awful things, and that had a massive impact on him for the rest of his life. Again, there's Tom. Okay, stayed there till 86, and then he came out, and he did. I can't remember what he did for a civvy as a civvy, but I do know, just like his brother, he joined the TA. Well, he joined the TA rather than Royal Air Force Auxiliary, so he went back to the Queen's Regiment in Croydon, did his time. I don't know how long he stayed in there. And when he did, he got his medal, like same as Tom, at the top right-hand side, and retired from the service completely. I'm quite amazed that they actually went back, because I know that from my R&R research that many naval reservists after the First and Second World War thought they needed a break, so they obviously didn't. I think you see the photo on the bottom left. The first one there is that's George, and that's Tom, and that's Wal, and that's my gran. And that's about it for today. The next time we get together is quite interesting. It's non-stop. It's about while he was artillery, he landed on in Normandy. Then we got my other uncle who landed at Monte Cassino. Then another uncle who was with the infantry, South Staffs in Normandy. And I'm actually blown away. I mean, the amount of, especially Wally with the artillery, they were everywhere, almost everywhere. They worked with the Canadians in at Juno Beach, and then they were with the Brits over at Cardiff. They just it was everywhere. So it's really quite impressive. And I thought I'd just end this one with the next generation. That's my late brother's granddaughter, who has just joined the RAF cadet. So, and she just sent me that photograph. So I thought, I'd throw it in as a bonus. And that's it, folks. That is it. Oh, where are we? I'll shut that down. And it's over.
That was
Thank
fun.
you.
Thank you. That was good.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just find that, I don't know, the things that you learn, it's like the fixed bayonets thing. I mean, one bloke says he come out of these woods and and there was they were totally blown away. They come out of these woods onto what I guess you'd call a logging road, and there was a German dispatch rider fixing his motorbike. Obviously, they were both shocked to see each other, and the German just got up and run. And this fella says, he said, I did manage to get a round off, but he said, I just think I made him run faster. So he's just, and it's just these little stories. And I'm trying to think, but there's also things that you learn about. Again, I spoke to, there's a lot of bravery and courage in Arnhem anyway, particularly comes from different areas that you don't expect. Some you do. I mean, there was one particular part, one bloke said that he didn't have much respect for the RASC until when he was at the LZ on the ground in at Hardenstein, where the headquarters was. He said, and the Dakota came across, and it had been hit, and it was obviously going to crash at some stage. But the air dispatchers were still throwing kit out to the lads, even though they knew that they weren't going to see the flight. And then it got hit again, and it really went down. And the air dispatchers, when they could have jumped out, still kept throwing kit out to the lads. And I just find it blown away that, and he said that my respect for these fellas just changed in an instant when I knew that they knew they weren't going to be going home tonight. And and they even though a lot of it, of course, went to the Germans because they hadn't been able to tell them that the LZs have been over. Some of the LZs have been. See, that was one of the problems I think as well. Too many LZs, too many landing zones. All right, they had them, and they didn't. What people that it's funny, you watch the bridge too far, and it almost becomes like a Bible for what went on at Arnhem, but it isn't. It would have been better served if they'd have done a series like The Pacific or like Band of Brothers, where it's like because there's so many important elements that you just can't put in a 2-hour movie that and they're not negative elements. There's a lot of positive stuff in there. People, like for example, 30 Corps, 82nd, 101st fought like tigers. It doesn't give it that impression on there. And in fact, they even play some silly music at one time when they're trying to go to that bridge at the Grave and it blows up. And I'm thinking that they really don't do these fellas justice. And one, they'd go forward, and then the Germans would come back and take the road back behind them. So then they had somehow to, and it was just like it's just missed out. It was like on the 22nd of September, the day after they lost the bridge, or most of them had been taken. There was 2 tank squadrons and the Duke of Cornwall's light infantry on the southern bank. And one of the tank commanders signaled, said, "Can we go across the bridge? Can we go?" And he said, and he was given the instruction, "No, they've lost the bridge. Basically, they've off the bridge, so don't do it." So you look at it, and and I've got to say, and I'm not going to go into it all. I mean, because I'm not an expert. It's only what I've read and what other people's views. But I would say there were 2 incidents, which I'm not going to go into now, which made a big difference. But if those decisions, they could have done it. It's incredible. They would never. I don't think they'd have ever. I don't think they had the capacity to swing right into Germany like they originally planned to. Even if they'd have took Arnhem Bridge, they wouldn't have been able to have done that. I just don't think they'd have had the resources. But I do believe they could have got there on time, even though there was a lot of delay and a lot of fighting going on. I mean, Nijmegen, there was a hell of a battle going on there. I'll tell you what else is funny, actually. I learned there's a little bit of Germany that crosses the near Rhine, North Rhine into Holland, or into that near Nijmegen. And the 82nd Airborne went in there to clear out some, because it's a high point, Grusbeck it's called, and it's a high point, and the Germans were there. And the 82nd went in, I think it was, yeah, I think it was 82nd, went in. And what actually that meant was that they were the very first into Germany. They were, it wasn't, it was just then, and that was quite an interesting little fact. I mean, it's like, for example, on the bridge too far, it shows the Poles not getting through; they're all getting shot up under it. The truth of the matter was, the night before, and this is where missing stuff out is important. The night before, 250 Poles went across the river unopposed. All right, why they only did one trip? This is the things you can't work at. If they'd have kept going, they'd have got more across. So there was 250 Poles fighting with the First Airborne in Arnhem, all right, or Newstebeek, before. And so this thing that they show on the film where they all got shot, that did happen, but that happened afterwards, once the Germans realised what was going on, and they repositioned themselves. There was 12 German Jews fighting in the airborne division. And this tickles me because they gave them Scottish names in case they got taken prisoner. And anyone who knows, I can't even understand someone from Glasgow. So it was a real winner to give them, to give them Scottish names. They were never going to get found. And one lad is actually buried in the Easterbeek Cemetery. Royal Rue's name was. So the film was great, but there's so much more, so many more that you could have got from it, really. Anyway, I could talk for Britain, and it's nearly 10 o'clock, isn't it? So, or not for me, it is. Must make it nearly 2 o'clock for you, I guess. Is it something like 3 o'clock?
It's going on 3 on my end of the world, but
I'll
yeah.
try and make the last one shorter.
Don't worry about it. They're fun. I'm enjoying it. So
This is very good.
I'm glad you like it anyway. I just love the research. I mean, I've got 8 chapters of their history, my family's history. Well, 9 actually, my grandfather. I've got other stuff that goes back. But family history only interests family, really. But the fact that they were involved with the war, it means it can be, their contribution. It opens it up to, it means it makes it more interesting for other people. That's all. So, as I say, next week you got Charlie. He was in tanks. Or reckon next time is Then you've got Jim. Jim's another. She wouldn't imagine him. He was He worked in an office when he got back for the post office. In Croydon, in one of the big offices. A gentleman, short. Anyway, he's infantry, and he was at Normandy, and then he ended up actually working for ENSA. The Bob Hope and all those that used to go around and do their. He got injured. He got wounded or something, and so when he got back, if you're out of your regiment for more than a fortnight, then they reallocate you to another unit. But because he could drive and they needed a driver, they allocated him to ENSA, which is the entertainment service for the national whatever it was. And Bob Hope and Vera Lynn and all those used to go around and do these concerts. And I've got a photo of him with a couple of lads outside the USO in France. So his injury or whatever it was, he didn't go. And then like I say, Wally's the one that impresses me, because Wally, I would never have imagined he'd gone through what he went. Where he was, all over the place. Absolute carnage in some places. But again, each one's a story in its own right, and I do try and keep it short. Anyway, you want to go? Well, I guess I want to go to bed. You've probably got things to do now.
okay. Well, we will see you next month, and thank you. I'm enjoying them. And I can't help but think that everybody who's logging in and Steve will post it on the website. So I'm sure there's a lot of other people who are going to be checking it out too.
Well, my mate's airborne, and he was going to have it. I've told him about it. I was going to try and see if he'd come along, but it's Valentine's Day, and he's all loved up, and so he's going to he's going to watch it on YouTube.
Thank you, Maurice.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
We will see you next month.
Yeah.
You take care.
Good night, all. Good afternoon, all.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. I'm going to log off too.